The ship went dark at 2:17 standard. Not dim, not flickering. Dark. 1 second a civilian-arced Pelican Vale glowed with warm corridor strips and soft ceiling lamps designed to keep frightened children calm on long-haul migration routes. The next, every light vanished at once, and 300 civilians were thrown into a darkness, so complete it felt physical, like the void outside had reached to the hull and put a hand over every mouth. Then the alarm started. Not one clean warning. A broken chorus. Hull security. Navigation fault. Internal pressure variance. Unauthorized access on Deck 7. Communications relay failure. Route deviation. A woman screamed somewhere down the corridor before the automated voice could even finish announcing the first emergency. Doors began slamming out of order. Some sealed open. Others locked shut, with people still pounding on the wrong side. The Pelican Vale was not a military carrier. It was a floating promise. Teachers, medics, structural planners, freshwater chemists, atmospheric engineers, families, children, and enough seed vaults and habitat printers to build the first human settlement above the black oceans of Nereid 9. It had counseling suites, hydrotherapy walls, nursery decks. It had exactly 12 contract guards, and all 12 were suddenly off-grid. By the time emergency red strips crawled alive along the floor, panic had already outrun instruction. People stumbled into the main transit spine half-dressed, clutching children, medical kits, tablets, blankets. A systems coordinator in a gray transit vest kept shouting that it was probably a Cascade fault, even as his own hands shook too hard to keep hold of his console. Near the junction to Med Bay, Dr. Linmar was trying to calm a bleeding boy whose father had broken a wrist forcing open a jammed cabin door. Somewhere farther aft, metal groaned. Deep mechanical wrong. Then someone said the sentence that changed the air. Those failures aren't random. The voice was low, flat, and too calm. A woman standing near the emergency bulkhead turned at the sound. So did Dr. Lin. The speaker was a passenger she recognized only vaguely, a quiet transfer listed as an educational logistics auditor. Traveling alone, always early to meals, always seated where they could see exits. Mid-30s, plain dark jacket, no visible panic, no wasted motion. While everyone else stared at the dead ceiling lights as if answers might fall out of them, that passenger was watching the floor strips, the door timings, the blind corners. That breach warning hit after internal lockdown, they said. Comms jammed before route deviation announced. Someone took the ship from the inside first. Nobody answered for half a heartbeat. Then the systems coordinator snapped. This is a civilian vessel. There is no from the inside. The passenger ignored him and pointed instead. Move the families away from Junction C. If they board, they'll come through the widest spine first. Do not crowd the intersections. You'll trap yourselves. There was something chilling about how quickly those instructions made sense. Dr. Lin opened her mouth to ask who they were, but the coordinator had already yanked up a partial manifest on his flickering wrist display. He scanned the passenger's file, frowning. Wait! His face changed. Occupation, educational logistics auditor. Clearance, civilian tier 2. Then beneath it, fragmented override strings. Redacted routing stamps. A transit tag that had been wiped and rewritten so badly, it looked like two identities had been crushed together. What is this? He whispered. The passenger looked at the screen once, expression unreadable. Then the ship shuddered so violently the corridor lights blinked blood red. A distant boom rolled through the arc. Not an engine fault, not structural drift. A shape breach. Somewhere forward, steel screamed open. And in the sudden silence that followed, everyone on the Pelican Vale heard the same thing drifting into the shattered ventilation grid. Boot steps. Heavy, measured, multiple. The passenger lifted their eyes toward the sound, and for the first time Dr. Lin felt something colder than fear. Recognition. Dr. Lin had spent 11 years in transit medicine, and in those 11 years, she had learned that panic had a sound. It was not screaming. Screaming came later. Panic was a wet, breathless silence that hit just before a crowd decided whether to freeze, scatter, or stampede. That silence now flooded Junction C. 36 civilians stood packed beneath the red emergency strips. staring toward the forward corridor where the bootsteps had first echoed. A child began crying into his mother's shoulder. Someone whispered a prayer. The systems coordinator with a broken manifest display kept swiping at his wrist console as if enough frantic gestures might force the ship to become normal again. The quiet passenger did not waste a second on any of it. "Doctor," they said, already moving, "how many people can medbay secure?" Lynn blinked. "What?" "The medical wing. Reinforced doors, independent oxygen, emergency lockers." "How many?" She swallowed. "If we seal triage in the 2 recovery suites, maybe 60. More if we pack them in. Then you take children injured and anyone who can't run. Everyone else moves aft in pairs, not groups. No one uses the main spine unless there's no choice." The systems coordinator turned on them, voice cracking. "You do not get to give orders here." The passenger crouched beside the bleeding boy and, with hands far steadier than Lynn should have been in that moment, tightened the pressure bandage around the child's scalp. "No," they said evenly, "but I know what comes next." There was again that same wrongness. Not bravery, not confidence, familiarity. Lynn felt it slide under her skin. Before she could say anything, the corridor speakers hissed, died, and then crackled back to life with a burst of static so violent several people flinched. The ship's automated voice was gone. A new voice came through instead. Male, amplified, distorted by cheap external comm hardware. Calm in a way predators sometimes sounded calm. "Attention aboard civilian vessel Pelican Vale. Remain where you are and you may survive transfer. Resist and you'll be depressurized with a compartment." The mother holding the crying child made a broken sound in her throat. The voice continued. "We are in control of navigation, communications, and forward security. We are not here for your food stores. We are not here for your medical supplies. We are here for inventory discrepancy item 719. A pause. Cooperate, and unnecessary deaths may be minimized." The message cut. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Then the corridor erupted. "What does that mean? What inventory?" "Oh, God, they're already inside." "Seal the doors. We need the guards." "There are no guards," the systems coordinator shouted back. And that was a wrong thing to say because terror spread faster once it had language. The crowd started pushing in 3 directions at once. The passengers stood in the middle of it, eyes never leaving the forward corridor. Not random, Lynn thought. They had said it before anyone else. Not random. A second boom thundered through the hull. Closer this time. The floor kicked hard enough to throw 2 people off balance. Ceiling dust drifted in red light. Somewhere on an upper deck, glass shattered in a long, cascading wave. The passenger seized the systems coordinator by the arm, not roughly but with absolute control. "You said all 12 guard are off-grid. Did they vanish at once?" The man stared. "How did you? Did they?" "Yes." That means either their command net was spoofed or they were isolated before first contact. The passenger released him and pointed at his wrist display. "Bring up deck access logs. Last 15 minutes. It's half dead." "Then show me the half that isn't." He obeyed. Lynn noticed that, the way people obeyed this person before they had consciously decided to. The tiny display spilled broken lines of data across the cracked screen. Sealed compartments, failed handshakes, badge pings, corrupted transit records. Lynn barely understood any of it. But the passengers scanned it once and their face changed. Not dramatically. Just enough for her to notice they had found something. "What?" she asked. Instead of answering, they looked up at the civilians bunching toward the central corridor and raised their voice for the first time. Everyone away from the center line. "Now!" Something in that tone cut through the chaos better than any alarm. "Against the walls," they snapped. "Leave the middle clear." A few obeyed instantly. Most hesitated. The passenger grabbed the systems coordinator's shoulder and shoved him flat against the bulkhead an instant before a bright line appeared across the sealed forward hatch. It glowed orange, then white. The metal began to sag inward. Thermal cutter. Lynn had never seen one before, but some primitive part of her knew exactly what it was. The shape of danger translated itself easily enough. Someone screamed. A man near the hatch turned and rammed the wrong direction, straight down the center of the corridor. The passenger lunged, caught him by the jacket, and slammed him into the wall just as the hatch detonated inward. The blast did not fill the corridor with flame. It filled it with force. Shards of superheated metal sighed through the space where the man had been a fraction of a second earlier. Red pressure vapor burst from a ruptured conduit in the ceiling. Smoke rolled low and fast. 2 civilians who had ignored the order to clear the centerline went down screaming, legs shredded by fragments. And through the smoking breach came figures in dark boarding shells, helmet-sealed weapons already raised. Not scavengers, not desperate raiders. 2 organized, 2 clean, for in the first wave, 1 kneeling immediately to secure angle coverage, 1 sweeping left, 1 right, 1 staying center with a compact rifle, and a chest rigged too professional for random piracy. Their visors reflected the emergency strips like strips of blood. The lead boarder saw the civilians and made the smallest motion with his barrel. On your knees. Nobody moved. Then the first shot hit the ceiling above them, not aimed to kill. A warning. The scream that followed finally broke the crowd's paralysis. People dropped, scrambled, sobbed, dragged each other across the floor. A father threw himself over his daughter. The systems coordinator lost his console. It skidded away under a smoking shower of sparks. Lynn's body wanted to kneel too, or run, or become very small and invisible. Instead, absurdly, she looked at the passenger. They were not kneeling. They had stepped half in front of the child with the bandaged head, and Dr. Lynn, without seeming to move at all. Their hands were empty. Their expression was flat. One of the boarders swung his rifle toward them. "You deaf?" The passenger tilted their head slightly, studying the formation the way another person might study bad architecture. For visible, Lynn thought wildly, but the passenger wasn't counting for. Their eyes flicked once to the dark service vent above the breach. 5. There was a 5th attacker hidden out of sight, covering from elevation. Lynn didn't know how she knew that. Maybe because the passenger's gaze had told her. The lead boarder took 1 step forward. "Inventory discrepancy item 719, he said. "You identify and surrender the asset now." No one answered. The man's helmet turned slowly across the kneeling civilians, scanning faces. And then, impossibly, it stopped on the quiet passenger. Not because they had spoken, because the boarder recognized something too. The rifle came up a fraction. The air changed. Lynn felt, with sudden absolute certainty, that whatever was wrong with the manifest had just become the most dangerous fact on the ship. The passenger's voice, when it came, was very soft. "You tracked the wrong anomaly." The boarder fired. And for the first time since the blackout began, the quiet passenger moved like the file on their manifest had never existed at all. The shot should have hit center mass. Dr. Lynn knew that later because she kept replaying the angle in her head, again and again, try to understand how a human body could have been standing in one place and then simply not be there when the trigger broke. The rifle cracked. The quiet passenger moved before the muzzle flash fully bloomed. Not backward, not down, forward, a violent, efficient diagonal step that took them inside the boarder's line before Lynn's brain had even finished recognizing the sound of gunfire. Their left hand slapped the rifle barrel aside. The round tore a burning groove through the bulkhead where Lynn's head had been a heartbeat earlier. Their right hand drove into the attacker's throat seam. Not a punch, not exactly. A short, brutal strike delivered to a tiny gap between helmet and chest plate. The boarder folded as if a switch had been thrown inside him. Chaos detonated. The kneeling civilian screamed. The hidden 5th attacker in the vent opened fire immediately, spraying the corridor with sharp bursts that shattered light strips and sent everyone flattening to the deck. The passenger ripped the first boarder's weapon free before his body hit the floor and fired upward at the vent in one smooth motion. 3 shots. Metal screamed. A heavy shape crashed out of the darkness above and landed across the corridor hard enough to rattle the deck. The remaining boarders corrected fast. Too fast for amateurs. Left flank fired. Right flank advanced. Center pivoted to secure the crowd. They were trained, disciplined, and already adjusting to the fact that this had stopped being a standard seizure operation. The passenger was faster. They kicked the dead man's rifle across the floor toward the systems coordinator. "Do not shoot unless the barrel is on them," they said, as if discussing evacuation procedure. Then they seized a rolling med cart beside Lynn and hurled it sideways into the left attacker. The cart smashed into his knees. He staggered. The passenger closed distance instantly, using the falling boarder as partial cover, while firing 2 control rounds under his arm toward the center attacker. One boarder dropped. Another spun, hit in the shoulder joint, and slammed into the wall. Lynn had seen panic wounds, crushed trauma, decompression burns, industrial chemical splashes. She had never seen violence performed with that kind of terrifying economy. No wasted motion, no hesitation, no fear, only decisions. "Move," the passenger barked. That broke Lynn loose. She grabbed the bandaged boy with one arm and hauled his mother up with the other. Around them, civilians scrambled, dragged each other, crawled, sobbed, slipped in blood and coolant. The systems coordinator stared stupidly at the rifle sliding near his hand until Lynn screamed at him to take it. He did, badly. His fingers shook so hard he almost dropped it, but the mere fact that he was holding it made the right side boarder hesitate for half a second, and that half second was enough. The passenger shot the lighting node overhead. The corridor plunged back into darkness, red floor strips the only remaining illumination. Now the attackers had the same problem civilians did. Blind corners, bad visibility, too many bodies. The passengers seemed completely comfortable in all 3. They ducked low, shoved a fallen storage bin into the right side attacker's ankles, and shot him through the visor the instant his balance broke. The last conscious boarder tried to retreat toward the melted hatch, switching from capture posture to kill posture, so abruptly that even Lynn, half dragging 2 civilians toward medbay, could feel the change in him. Mission altered. No more soft transfer. Now it was elimination. He raised his rifle toward the retreating cluster of passengers. The systems coordinator finally fired. The shot went wide, chewing sparks out of deck, but it distracted the boarder just enough of the passenger to cross the corridor and slam him into the still glowing hatch frame. The smell that followed, burnt fabric, scorched polymer, cooked flesh, sent several people retching. The passenger stripped the man's sidearm, jammed it under the seam of his helmet, and ended the struggle with a single muffled report. Then everything went eerily still. Not safe, just still in the way storms sometimes went still when they were deciding which direction to tear next. Dr. Lynn stood with one arm around the child and the other around his mother, staring through smoke and emergency haze at the person listed on the manifest as an educational logistics auditor. They were breathing hard now, not from panic, from exertion. There was blood on their cheek that did not appear to be theirs. The systems coordinator was the first to find words. "Who?" he said hoarsely. "Are you?" The passenger bent and yanked a compact comm unit from the dead team leader's chest rig. They did not answer question. Instead, they pressed 2 fingers against the side of the device, listened for half a second, and their face darkened. "We have maybe 4 minutes," they said. Lynn stared. "For minutes until what?" "Until the next team reaches this junction and realizes the first one didn't report in." The words hit the corridor harder than the gunfire had. A woman near the wall started crying again, soft and hopeless. The systems coordinator lowered the rifle as though it had suddenly become too heavy to hold. "No," he said. "No, that was the attack team. That. The passenger cut in was a retrieval unit. They looked at the bodies as if confirming a math problem. Disciplined entry. Restraint shots first. Repeated reference to item 719. They expected compliance, not resistance. Their eyes lifted to Lynn's. That means whoever they're really after is still alive and still somewhere on this ship. Lynn's throat felt dry. "You think one of us is cargo?" "I think somebody on this ark matters enough to divert a hostile intercept team into restricted transit lanes. A beat. And I think whoever planned this knew the security layout in advance." The systems coordinator went white. "Inside help," Lynn whispered. The passenger gave the smallest nod. That landed worse than everything else. Because fear of the enemy was simple. Fear that someone had opened the door for them hollowed people out from the inside. A chime sounded from the stolen comm unit. One short tone. Then a distorted voice, impatient and clipped. Team 3 status. Silence. The voice came again, harder now. Team 3, confirm containment. We have the lower cargo sectors. Repeat. We have the lower cargo sectors. Report. The passenger thumbed the mute switch before anyone else could breathe too loudly. Lower cargo sectors. Lynn's mind lurched. Seed vaults. Water processors. Structural printers. Atmospheric scrubber modules. Half the future of the colony sat in lower cargo. And, apparently, so did the people who had boarded them. The passenger looked at the civilians crowding the corridor, at the wounded, at the terrified faces, at Lynn. Get everyone you can to Med Bay, they said. Seal triage, lock recovery, and kill the corridor lights manually. If the systems won't obey, pull the fuse panels. Lynn heard herself say, "You're not coming?" "No, you can't go alone." A strange expression crossed their face then. Something so brief, she almost missed it. Not amusement. Something closer to resignation. "Doctor," they said, "I was never supposed to be here." Before she could make sense of that, they crouched beside one of the dead boarders and began stripping gear with ruthless efficiency. Spare magazines, shock tabs, compact blade, access baton, encrypted patch tags. Their hands moved like this was muscle memory worn, so deep it no longer needed thought. The systems coordinator backed up a step. "You can't seriously be thinking of going toward them." The passenger rose, checked the stolen rifle, and slung it across their back. "They have cargo internal routes, and probably hostages within 10 minutes if nobody slows them down. So yes, that's insane." "No," the passenger said. "It's arithmetic." Lynn almost laughed at the absurdity of that, but terror had hollowed laughter out of her. She adjusted the boy in her arms instead. He was conscious now, wide-eyed and shaking, staring at the bodies on the deck. The passenger noticed. For the first time, their voice softened. To the boy, not the adults. "Stay with the doctor. Do exactly what she says." The child nodded once. Then the passenger turned back to Lynn. "If anyone asks," they said, "you never saw me do this." Lynn stared at them. "That's your plan." "No, a pause. That's the part that matters later." They stepped over the ruined hatch and vanished into the smoke-choked forward corridor before anyone could stop them. For 3 full seconds, nobody moved. Then the stolen comm unit crackled in Lynn's hand. She had not even realized the passenger had pressed it into her palm. A new voice came through this time, different from the command voice, urgent, lower, scared. "Bridge confirms discrepancy on the live manifest," the unseen raider whispered. "Listen carefully. The wrong person is awake." The transmission cut. Lynn looked up slowly. The systems coordinator was staring at her. Around them, the surviving civilians had gone completely silent again. Not because the danger was over, because every one of them had just understood the same thing at once. The attackers had boarded the ship hunting one anomaly, and they had just run headfirst into another. Dr. Lynn did not remember getting everyone to Med Bay. Later, she would remember fragments. A child sock sliding in blood on the deck, the systems coordinator dropping his stolen rifle and then scrambling back for it with both hands, an elderly hydroponics tech refusing to move until somebody found his wife, the endless mechanical pulse of the emergency lights painting every face the same color as fresh wounds. But the corridor itself became a blur of triage and momentum. Move the injured, count the breathing, shut the doors. Do not think. The medical wing had never been designed to hold this many people at once. It was a civilian transit clinic. 3 treatment bays, a surgical room for routine emergencies, 2 recovery suites, compact pharmaceutical storage, and a reinforced isolation section meant for contagion events, not armed seizure. By the time Lynn got the first wave through the main bulkhead, the room already felt too small. Mothers sat on the floor with children pressed under their arms. A structural engineer with shrapnel in his calf bit down on a folded blanket, while a nurse sealed the wound. Someone had dragged in 2 supply carts and shoved them sideways against the entryway as if furniture could help against rifles. It still felt better than the corridor, because at least in here the walls were intact. "For now, lock it," Lynn said. No one moved. Lock the door. That broke the trance. One of the nurses slapped the manual seal, and the med bay bulkhead boomed shut. The sound rolled through the room like a promise, and a threat at the same time. The systems coordinator. Evan. Lynn finally remembered his name was Evan. Immediately turned the security console built into the wall. No response. He hit it again. Still nothing. The internal network's dead, he said, voice raw. They've ghosted the med wing from central control. Can they still open it? Someone asked. Nobody wanted the answer. Evan swallowed. If they've got root access to door systems? Yes. That stirred a fresh wave of panic. Quieter than the first one, but in some ways worse. At least screaming let fear leave the body. This was fear staying put and making nests. Lynn handed the bleeding boy off to a nurse and took stock the way she had been trained to do under pressure. 32 civilians inside already. 7 wounded. 1 serious leg trauma. 2 likely fractures. 1 panic-induced respiratory collapse. 3 children, separating from guardians every time the lights glitched. No security presence. No command channel. No updated map of the ship. No idea whether the boarding was limited or spreading deck by deck. And somewhere out there, the quiet passenger who was not an auditor and definitely not harmless had gone alone into the dark. Lynn hated that she was already thinking of them as a resource. She hated even more that it felt rational. Doctor? She turned. A young nurse, Paloma, stood near the surgical counter, clutching a half-open trauma kit. What do we do if they cut through the door? Lynn looked at the reinforced med bay bulkhead, civilian-grade composite, built to slow contamination, not military breaching charges. She could almost hear the answer the passenger would have given. Then you don't let them cut through on schedule. Instead, she said, we buy time. How? I don't know yet. That honesty did not help anyone. Across the room, Evan had set the stolen rifle on a treatment bed, as if it might explode on its own. He was hunched over a portable diagnostics terminal, trying to bring up local deck architecture without relying on the main network. Lynn crossed him. What did that last transmission mean? He looked up blankly. The one on the comm unit, she said. The wrong person is awake. His face tightened. I don't know. You know more than most people in this room. I'm a systems coordinator. You were a systems coordinator before armed boarders cut through the ship and started asking for an inventory discrepancy item. Lynn lowered her voice. So I'm asking again. Evan rubbed both hands over his face. I handled route synchronization and passenger indexing, he said. Not cargo authorization. Not black channel transfer lists. Nothing classified. You saw the manifest. He nodded once. The file on our mystery passenger was bad. Not corrupted bad. Layered bad. Like somebody had overwritten a transit identity on top of something older and meaner. He glanced toward the sealed medbay door. I should have reported it before launch. Lynn stared at him. You noticed before launch? Not enough to know what it was. Just enough to know it felt wrong. He let out a shaky breath. There were dozens of last-minute changes. Escort route cut. Passenger consolidations from 2 canceled transports. Cargo seals transferred from military freight to civilian index. I thought Central had gotten sloppy. Lynn thought of the passenger's first words in the corridor. Those failures aren't random. What about item 719? She asked. I don't know. You don't know or you don't want to say? His jaw worked. Before he could answer, something slammed against the outer corridor wall. A hard metallic impact. Close. Every head in med bay snapped toward the door. Then came a muffled burst of sound. 2 short shots, a scream, and a heavy clang of something or someone hitting deck plating. The room froze. Children stopped crying because adults had. Lynn felt her own pulse in her teeth. Nobody breathed until the silence returned. Then a new sound reached them through the wall panel. Rapid footsteps, uneven, retreating. More shouting farther away. Not close enough to understand. Only enough to know the ship was still being fought over. Evan looked at the rifle on the bed. Then at Lynn. That's them, he whispered. She did not ask whether he meant the raiders or the passenger. Maybe both. Another nurse hurried over from the isolation section. Doctor, We've only got 6 portable oxygen rigs and 2 emergency sedative injectors left. Somebody raided supply before we got here. Lynn turned sharply. Before? The inventory was light when I checked. Not from tonight. Older. Another missing piece. Or another theft. The ship was full of them. She forced herself to focus. Fine. Consolidate the breathing kits. Prioritize children and chest injuries. Anyone not actively wounded helps reinforce interior access. We don't have anything to reinforce with, Paloma said. Lynn looked around the room. Cabinets, treatment beds, portable scanners, surgical frames, a refrigerator unit full of tissue sealants and biological packs. Weak things, civilian things. Then her gaze landed on the isolation section. Negative pressure quarantine doors, manual wheel locks, thick transparent barriers, independent air scrubber hookups. Not enough to stop a boarding team. Enough to slow one. Move the uninjured into isolation 2 and 3. Lynn said, if they breach med bay, we fall back section by section. We make them cut through every compartment. Paloma blinked. You think like that now? Lynn almost said no. Somebody infected me with the idea. Instead, she snapped, move. People obeyed because they needed someone to obey. Across the room, a little girl sitting on the floor with both hands over her ears watched Lynn with huge, silent eyes. Lynn recognized her vaguely from family orientation 3 days ago. 7, maybe 8. Her mother was among the people from Junction C. Her father, Lynn's throat tightened. She had not seen. The girl looked from Lynn to the sealed bulkhead and asked a question everyone older was too frightened to say out loud. Are the bad people coming here? Lynn crouched in front of her. Maybe, she said carefully. The girl's chin trembled. Will the quiet one stop them? That hit harder than Lynn expected, because even now, after what she had seen, she did not know whether to be relieved by that thought or terrified of what it implied. I don't know, Lynn said. It was the only honest answer she had. The girl nodded as if that made sense, then drew her knees tighter to her chest. Lynn rose and crossed back to the treatment bed where the stolen comm unit sat beside the rifle. The device was dark now, but she could not stop looking at it. One whispered transmission. One sentence. The wrong person is awake. Not on board. Not identified. Awake. As if whoever the raiders wanted had been dormant before tonight. Hidden. Unaware. As if the blackout and the breach had changed something bigger than access control. Evan, she said suddenly. He looked up from the terminal. What did you mean when you said cargo seals were transferred from military freight to civilian index? He hesitated. I mean exactly that. Somewhere in the final route stack, several containers got reclassified so they could travel without escort flags. I assumed it was budget politics. What kind of containers? I never saw the contents. Just mass values, lock authorizations, and compartment numbers. Show me. He turned the terminal toward her. The display was ugly and incomplete, but some data still held. Cargo deck maps blinked in and out. Seal statuses rolled past in amber blocks. Near the lower hold sections, a cluster of red-coded entries pulsed with unresolved access conflicts. Compartment group C lower 7. Transferred index authorization. Special handling. Biometric dual lock. Lynn leaned closer. How many containers? 3. Large. No, Evan frowned. That's the strange part. Small footprint units. Heavy shielding. Low external thermal signature. Almost like... He stopped. Like what? Like they weren't transporting equipment, he said quietly. Like they were transporting something meant not to be scanned. A cold weight settled in Lynn's stomach. Before she could push further, the medbay lights flickered. Not from battle damage. From control override. Every screen in the room went black. A collective gasp rolled through the civilians. Then the main wall display at the far end of the treatment wing lit up all at once. Flooding the room was static gray distortion. Children cried out. Several adults backed away instinctively as the static resolved into a grainy camera feed from somewhere else on the ship. Lower cargo. Lynn knew because the angle showed stacked colony infrastructure pallets, sealed water systems, habitat lattice frames, and bodies. 3 civilians on their knees. Two contract guards lying face down, not moving, and behind them, standing with absolute composure in matte boarding armor, was a man Lynn had never seen before but hated instantly. He had no helmet on, shaved head, a pale scar running from one ear to his collar, eyes like polished wire. One hand rested on the shoulder of a kneeling civilian, whose face was turned away from camera. The other held a sidearm lazily pointed at the floor. When he spoke, his voice filled Med Bay with terrible ease. "Good evening, passengers of the Pelican Vale." Nobody moved. By now, some of you have noticed that this operation has not gone according to schedule. His mouth twitched, not quite a smile. That is unfortunate for everyone. He tilted his head slightly, as if listening to another feed in his ear. Here is how this works. You are carrying restricted inventory under civilian veil. We will recover it. You will not interfere. If you do, casualties accelerate. He squeezed the shoulder of the kneeling civilian beside him. The person flinched. Dr. Lynn's skin went cold, because she recognized a civilian now. Not cargo crew, not command staff, a passenger. An elderly woman who had spent the first week of the voyage teaching children oceanic star maps in the observation lounge. Inventory discrepancy item 719 was a person. The man on screen continued. One more thing. The individual who disrupted Team 3 should understand this clearly. Now his eyes seemed to look through the camera, through the walls, straight into Med Bay. You have already made yourself visible. That was an error. Lynn felt the room tighten around her. He knew, maybe not who, but enough. "You can keep killing my people," he said almost pleasantly. "It will not change the count. We are already where we need to be." He lifted the sidearm and pressed it against the elderly woman's temple. Gasps broke through Med Bay. Someone sobbed openly. "You have 10 minutes, he said. "After that, I start opening compartments until I find the one thing this ship was never supposed to move." The feed cut to black. For a second, only the hum of medical air scrubbers filled the room. Then every display came back at once, as if nothing had happened. The elderly woman's face stayed burned into Lynn's mind anyway. Evan made a strangled sound beside her. "That's impossible." Lynn turned. "You know her?" "No," he whispered. "That's not what I mean." He pointed at the lower cargo map, still open on the terminal. The blinking cluster at Sea Lower 7 had changed. One of the 3 red-coated containers was no longer unresolved. It was open, and the biometric log attached to it showed a fresh authentication stamp. Not from the raiders. From someone already aboard the Pelican Vale. Somebody on this ship had opened the hidden compartment from the inside, and whoever, or whatever, had come out was now awake. Evan's hand started shaking so hard the terminal nearly slipped off the treatment bed. Lynn caught the edge of it before it fell. "Show me," she said. "I am showing you." The biometric line pulsed in red against the cargo schematic. "See lower 7/Unit 02. Seal integrity. Breached. Authorization chain. Internal. Biometric verification. Accepted. Identity source. Masked/unresolved. Masked. Unresolved. Not pirate access. Not remote override. Someone with valid biological clearance, or something spoofing it perfectly, had opened one of the hidden containers from inside the ship. Lynn forced herself to think around the panic. Could they fake that? Evan swallowed. Not on a civilian system. That isn't a yes. It's a maybe if you have military ghostware, dual-key bioemulation, and somebody already poisoned the ship's transit stack before launch. He looked up at her, eyes hollow. So yes, somewhere behind them, a child began crying again, not loudly, just in exhausted little hiccups. It somehow made everything worse. The room had become too full of people trying not to break. Lynn looked back at the line on the display. 1 container open, 2 still sealed, 3 hidden units, small footprint, shielded, reclassified into civilian transit. An old woman in lower cargo with a gun to her head, and a man on the other side of the ship who had watched the boarding team disappear, and concluded the answer was to start peeling compartments open like fruit. She felt suddenly certain of one thing, whatever item 719 was. It was bigger than a hostage retrieval and more dangerous than stolen cargo. It was something people had lied around, something someone had buried under ordinary lives and educational manifests and children's star maps. The quiet passenger had known the ship was compromised within seconds, and now the raiders were saying the wrong person was awake. Lynn drew in one breath, then another. Can you contact them? Evans stared. Who? The passenger. You don't even know their name. Neither do you, Lynn said. Can you contact them? He looked at the stolen comm unit, still lying beside the rifle. Maybe isn't useful. It's more useful than nothing. That was true, and Lynn hated how quickly the standards of reason had collapsed. Evans snatched up the comm unit and began prying at the casing with the corner of a bone saw from the surgical tray. Lynn watched him work, half from impatience, half because movement was easier to bear than the waiting. Behind them, Med Bay had become a strange imitation of order. Paloma and the other nurses had gotten the uninjured into the isolation suites. Treatment cots had been rolled against inner thresholds to create fallback choke points. One volunteer was stacking saline crates beside the pharmacy hatch as if medical fluid might stop rounds. Another was tearing sheets into strips for bandages nobody wanted to name yet. The frightened energy of a trapped crowd had shifted, not into courage exactly, but into tasks. Tasks kept terror from becoming a flood. Lynn clung to that. A sharp click came from Evans' hands. There, he had peeled back the comm unit shell and exposed a thin nest of circuitry and signal crystals. His fingers moved faster now, driven by fear and whatever system's logic still functioned under it. I can't reach ship channels, he muttered. But this unit pings on a short tactical relay net. If our mystery person took another set off the dead boarders, they might be listening on capture frequency. Might. Lynn looked toward the sealed medbay door. 10 minutes, the raider leader had said. No, less now. The clock had started the moment the screen went black. How long? She asked. To send? Evans said. Seconds. To know if it landed? Depend whether they're alive. That hit her hard enough she almost recoiled from it, because until that moment, some part of her had quietly treated the quiet passenger like a force of nature, a solution, a hidden weapon that had simply unmasked itself and gone to work, not a person who could already be bleeding out somewhere under emergency lights, not a person who, by their own words, had never been supposed to be here at all. Send it, she said. Evan keyed the unit live. Staticist. He winced at the feedback, adjusted the dial, and pressed transmit. We have eyes on lower cargo, he said, trying and failing to steady his voice. Leader in matte armor. Hostages present. One hidden unit in Sea Lower 7 already open from. Internal biometric authorization. Repeat. Hidden unit open from inside the ship. If you're receiving, respond. Silence. Only static. Evan released a key and waited. No answer. He looked at Lynn. She felt the urge to say try again at the exact same moment a heavy thud hit the outer bulkhead. Every face in Med Bay snapped toward the sound. Another thud followed. Not breaching. Not yet. Testing. Someone on the other side was hitting the door with something hard and deliberate, learning the composition. A child whimpered. A man near the back muttered, No, 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 under his breath, as if repetition alone might function as prayer. Then the speakers in Med Bay came alive again. Not the main wall display this time. Just audio. The same calm male voice. You are making this inefficient. The room shrank around the sound. Medical wing, he said. Open your door and surrender the passenger called Ilyave. Lynn frowned instinctively. The name meant nothing to her. Around the room, people were looking at one another in confusion. The voice continued. I will assume silence means ignorance rather than deception. For now, he had not asked for item 719. He had asked for a person. Ilyave, the quiet passenger, or someone else? Lynn's eyes moved to Evans and found the same realization there. We don't have that person, he called before she could stop him. A dangerous answer. Possibly the wrong one. But it was out now. There was a brief pause on the speaker, as if the man outside were consulting something or reconsidering the order of his cruelty. That is unfortunate, he said at last. Because one of you is lying, and I dislike searching by hand. The audio cut. At once, Lynn spun to Evan. Was that the name on the manifest? He shook his head immediately. No, the file I saw wasn't Ilya or anything. The civilian identity was different. So either the passenger has another name, or this isn't about them, he said. Neither option helped. From the floor near the children, a weak voice spoke up. Doctor? Lynn turned. The elderly woman's assistant, Nora, that was her name, one of the education volunteers, was sitting propped against the wall with a compression wrap around her shoulder. Pale, sweating, awake, Lynn crossed to her. Don't move. I'm not trying to. Nora swallowed. The woman on the screen. That was Pelican Vale. Lynn nodded once. You know her well? Nora gave a tiny, incredulous laugh. She ran half the children's learning blocks on this voyage. Did she ever mention cargo decks? Restricted access? Being transferred late? No, Nora's face tightened. But she did tell me not to trust the passenger lists. Lynn stilled. When? Second day after departure. Nora licked dry lips. We were doing orientation packs with families. She saw one of the children's ID bracelets printed with the wrong emergency deck assignment and just froze. Then she said the lists had been rewritten too many times by people who wanted the wrong names in the wrong places. Nora looked toward the door. I thought she was being paranoid. Lynn almost said maybe she was right. But of course she had been right. Paranoia was just pattern recognition with bad timing. Did she mention Ilya? Nora's brow furrowed. Then she went still, not with realization, with fear. Yes, she whispered. The word moved through Lynn like ice water. What did she say? Nora stared at nothing for a second, trying to drag the memory forward. She said if anyone ever came asking for that name, I was supposed to say I'd never heard it. She told me it wasn't a person anymore. It was a key. Evan made a noise beside the terminal. A key to what? Nora shook her head helplessly. She didn't say. Of course she hadn't. Open one loop, tighten 3 more. Lynn was about pushed further when the stolen comm unit on the treatment bed spat a burst of static so loud half the room jumped. Then a voice came through, low, controlled, breathing slightly harder than before. I received. Relief hit Lynn, so fast it almost made her weak. The quiet passenger was alive. Evan lunged to the unit and keyed it open. We're in Med Bay. Lower cargo hostages. Hidden container open from inside. Raiders are asking for someone named Ilya. A beat. Then the passenger said, do not answer that name if they ask again. Lynn stepped close enough to speak into mic. Who is Ilya? Static breathed back at them for one long second. When the answer came, it was not immediate, and that alone frightened her. Because this was a person who seemed to decide everything quickly. Ilya, the passenger said at last, is the reason the wrong ships were rerouted, the manifests were rewritten, and your ark was left without escort. The room had gone completely silent again. Even the children seemed to sense the importance of whatever was unfolding through that palm-sized speaker. Lynn gripped the edge of the treatment bed. Is it you? No. The answer came too cleanly to doubt. Then the passenger added, but I know what they think I'm carrying. Not enough, Lynn thought. Not nearly enough. What is item 719? She asked. Another pause. Then, a living access chain. Evan stared. That doesn't mean anything. It means, the passenger said, someone aboard this ship can unlock something they were never supposed to survive long enough to reach. Lynn tried to fit that into any sane frame and failed. A person as a key. A living access chain. Hidden cargo units small enough to conceal bodies or devices. An elderly education volunteer with a gun to her head. Raiders hunting a name that wasn't a name. What do we do? She asked. This time the passenger answered immediately. You keep Med Bay sealed. You do not let them separate the civilians. And you tell me whether the raider leader is still in lower cargo. Lynn looked to Evan, who was already dragging the local camera net through half-dead subchannels. No live feed, he said. They killed most optics. Thermal? The passenger asked through the comm. Evan blinked. Maybe. Hold on. His fingers flew across the terminal. The map stuttered. Deck overlays flashed. One ugly orange heat bloom emerged in lower cargo, then another, then several clustered masses amid the cold geometry of storage stacks. "He's there," Evan said, "or at least a command group is. Lower 7 cluster hasn't moved." Good. The single word carried no comfort. Lynn leaned toward the mic again. "You have a plan?" "Yes." She waited. Nothing else came. "That's it?" she demanded. "Yes." A breath crackled over the line. "Doctor, I'm in a maintenance run above cargo spine with 2 rounds left in the captured rifle, 1 functional shock tab, and a ship full of people I cannot evacuate fast enough. So yes, that's it." She closed her eyes briefly. "Fair. Then, tell me the plan." "We let him think Med Bay is the only problem." Evan looked up sharply. "What?" "He believes a passenger called Ilya Vey is hidden among civilians or under their protection. That keeps pressure on your compartment. I need him focused there for another 6 minutes." Lynn's stomach dropped. "You want us to be bait?" "I want him committed to the wrong door," the passenger said. "If he redeploys fully into lower cargo before I reach the hostage cluster, Tamsin Vale dies, and whatever came out of Unit 02 disappears with his team." Nora, still propped against the wall, whispered, "Tamsin knew." Lynn heard it and knew the passenger heard it too. "Correct," the voice on the comm said, "which is why she's alive. She can identify the asset." Asset. The word landed like a stain. Lynn forced herself back onto the track that mattered. "What happens in 6 minutes?" Silence. Then the quiet passenger said, "Either I get a lower cargo first, or he opens a second container." No one in Med Bay moved. Evan found his voice before Lynn did. "What's in the second container?" The answer came so softly, they almost missed it. "That," the passenger said, "is what I was sent to prevent." The line went dead. For a moment, nobody in the room seemed to understand that the silence meant the transmission was over. Then the outer bulkhead rang again. Not a test strike this time. A cutting torch. A bright seam of orange heat began to creep along the frame of Med Bay's main door. And Dr. Lynn, staring at that line of light, realized the quiet passenger had just told the truth in the most horrifying way possible. They were not here because of a paperwork mistake. They had been on the wrong ship, but not by accident. The torch bit into the Med Bay door with a sound like metal screaming through clenched teeth. A razor line of white-orange heat crawled across the seam, spitting sparks in the corridor outside and throwing hard, pulsing light to the narrow emergency viewport. The civilians nearest the bulkhead recoiled instinctively. One man put both hands over his daughter's ears. Someone in the isolation suite started praying again, louder this time. Dr. Lynn did not tell them to stop. She was too busy counting. Not seconds, not breaths, the 6 minutes, or whatever remained of them now. "Fall back positions," she snapped. "Now! Everyone away from the main door. If you can walk, you move. If you can lift, you help." The room jolted back into motion. Paloma and another nurse rolled 2 treatment beds sideways to create a partial second barrier across the inner treatment lane. Evan dragged supply crates toward the quarantine corridor. A young engineer Lynn did not know by name pulled the wheeled surgical light out of its floor lock and shoved it behind the improvised barricade, as if sheer mass might matter. 2 older civilians helped move the children first, crouching low, speaking gently through voices that trembled anyway. Lynn crossed to Nora, who was trying and failing to push herself upright one-handed. "No," Lynn said, pressing her back down. "Stay. I can still talk." "That's not walking." Nora ignored her. If Tamsin is alive because she can identify the asset, then she knew before launch. Lynn crouched beside her. "Then tell me what she knew." Outside, the torch screeched louder. A hot metallic stink seeped in around the doorframe. Nora squeezed her eyes shut, digging through panic and memory at once. She was afraid of names, she whispered. Not identities. Names. She said names on this ship were unstable. That if manifest changed enough, people became containers. Lynn stared at her. That sounded insane, which meant it was probably close to true. "What does that mean?" She said the ship wasn't just carrying passengers. It was carrying permissions. Nora swallowed painfully. Gene lock permissions. Legacy access. Human chain authorizations. Things governments use to bury in bloodlines and call security. Evan, halfway behind the crate barricade, looked up sharply. That's not possible anymore. Nora gave him a hollow look. Then why are armed retrieval teams cutting through civilian Ark to find one person they won't name directly? He had no answer. The torch outside paused. For one long second, the silence was worse than the noise had been. Then a heavy clunk rang against the bulkhead. Charge placement. Lynn felt every muscle in her body lock. "Down!" she shouted. The blast was smaller than the one at Junction C, but in the sealed geometry of Med Bay it felt enormous. The reinforced door buckled inward with a shriek. Composite splinters and hot fragments spat across the treatment floor. The outer lock held barely, but a warped crescent gap now yawned near the bottom hinge, big enough for sparks, smoke, and the muzzle of a rifle. 3 shots punched through immediately. Blind suppressive fire. One round tore through a cabinet of sterile wraps. Another smashed the wall monitor over triage. The third hit a saline crate and exploded it into clear spray that glittered in the red emergency lights. Children screamed. Lynn flattened beside Nora and dragged her farther back as Evan, to his own visible shock, grabbed the stolen rifle and fired once at the gap. The round hit the ruined lower hinge and sparked uselessly, but it achieved one thing. The shots from outside stopped for a beat. Testing, Lynn thought. They're still testing. The raider leader's voice came through the half-breached door, muffled by metal and heat. "You are spending lives for someone who is not with you." No one answered. He continued, almost conversational. "This is the last efficient offer you will receive. Open the medical wing. Surrender any passenger tied to the name Ilya Vay, and I will limit compartment clearing." Lynn rose just enough to speak, without exposing her full body to the opening. "We don't have that person. You may not know that you do." That answer chilled her more than the threat, because it meant he believed his own intelligence. Deeply, enough to bet time on it. And time was the only thing the quiet passenger had asked him to hold. Lynn looked at Evan. He looked at the terminal. The lower cargo heat cluster was still there, still dense, still not moving. Good, she thought with a kind of savage desperation. Stay where you are. The raider leader spoke again. "I'm going to count to 10. At 10, my team cuts the hinge side and floods the room." A pause. 1. Paloma, crouched behind the overturned treatment bed, whispered, "We can't stop that." "No," Lynn said quietly. "We can slow what comes through." 2. She scanned the room. Quarantine doors, oxygen rigs, mobile cautery unit, tissue sealants, portable anesthetic injectors, sharp things, heavy things, civilian things. Then her eyes caught on the wall panel for the isolation wing atmosphere controls. Independent negative pressure, localized purge, not enough to kill, but maybe enough to blind. 3. "Evan," she hissed, "can you cycle the med wing scrubbers manually?" He blinked. "Why?" "Can you?" "Yes. But if I overdrive them from local, do it on my mark." 4. She turned to Paloma. "The liquid sealant packs. All of them." Paloma stared. "Those are for wound closure." "I know what they're for." Outside, metal screamed again as the torch resumed. Higher now, working the hinge line. 5. Nora grabbed Lynn's wrist. Her fingers were weak but urgent. Tamsin once said, she whispered, if the wrong container opened first, the second one will be mistaken for rescue. Lynn did not understand. She almost told Nora that. Instead, she said, "What's in the second container?" Nora's eyes shone with fear. "I don't think it's a what." 6. The phrase lodged in Lynn's chest like shrapnel. Not a what, a who, or something close enough to a who that the difference no longer mattered. 7. Paloma slid a stack of viscous tissue-sealed canisters across the deck. Lynn grabbed 2 and crawled toward the ruined door, keeping low. The crescent gap at the bottom glowed with heat. Smoke leaked through in angry little breaths. 8. Through the slit she saw boots. 3 sets. No, 4. The command group was not all in cargo after all. He had kept at least a partial breach team on Med Bay. Good. Worse. Both. 9. Lynn looked back once. At the civilians holding children. At Evan hunched over the local atmosphere panel, fingers hovering. At the barricade that would not hold long. At the absurdity of being a transit doctor planning to weaponize medical equipment, while somewhere below them a stranger in a false identity moved toward a hidden container that was apparently a person and not a person, and possibly the reason this entire ship existed in the wrong place. 10. The torch cut through. The upper hinge snapped with a shrill metallic crack. The med bay door sagged inward on one side. Now! Lynn shouted. Evan slammed the local override. The med wing scrubbers roared to life at emergency extraction speed. Air pressure shifted violently toward the isolation ducts, whipping smoke, sparks, loose wraps, and hanging curtains sideways. At the same moment, Lynn jammed both tissue seal canisters through the breach gap and hurled them hard against the corridor deck outside. They burst on impact. Clear industrial polymer splashed across boots, the threshold, and the lower half of the failing door. Then the overdriven air system caught it, pulling the atomized sealant into a thick adhesive mist right through the cut opening and across the entry lane. A man outside shouted. Another cursed. One of them fired blindly through the breach and hit the buckled door itself, welding a shower of fresh sparks across his own team's position. Again! Lynn shouted. Paloma, and the engineer rolled 2 more canisters forward. Lynn and Evan shoved them through the opening as the scrape of boots outside turned frantic and uneven. The sealant spread fast, clinging to visors, gloves, weapon housings, the broken hinge teeth of the door. Under normal use, it was meant to bond flesh edges in trauma closure. On a half-breached entry team, it became panic. A rifle barrel forced through the upper gap, searching. Lynn swung the metal base of the portable surgical light, like a club, and smashed it sideways into the barrel. The weapon discharged into the ceiling. Someone outside screamed that his visor was sealed shut. Then Med Bay's outer door lurched inward at last. One armored raider forced his way through half-blind, shoulder first, adhesive smeared across one side of his helmet. He got 2 steps inside before Evan, making a raw sound that was more fear than courage, fired the stolen rifle from behind the barricade. The shot hit the raider high in the chest. Not fatal. Armor took most of it, but it staggered him, and staggered was enough. The young engineer Lynn did no lunge from the side with a pressurized oxygen rig, and rammed it like a battering ram straight into the raider's knees. He crashed backward into the warped doorframe, tangled with a half-melted bulkhead, and blocked the opening with his own body. For one stunned second, nobody moved. Then the raiders outside started trying to drag him back through. Lynn saw the opening widen, saw a second muzzle coming up, saw the whole ugly geometry about to collapse. And then every light in Med Bay died. Total blackout. Someone screamed. Not one of the civilians. A raider. A sharp, involuntary sound cut off almost instantly by something wet and final. Lynn froze. She had seen darkness before, but this darkness had shape to it. Intent. No floor strips. No monitor glow. Even the emergency panels were gone, as if someone had cut local power by hand rather than through the ship network. A beat later, there was a heavy impact in the breach zone. Then another. Then the unmistakable clatter of a weapon skidding across tile. Nobody in Med Bay dared move. Through the dark came breathing. One set close. Controlled. The kind of breathing Lynn had heard over the comm line. A small beam flicked once. Dim, shielded, directed downward so it would not blind the room. Just enough light to paint the outline of the ruined doorway. 2 raiders on the floor. One twisted half through the opening. One crumpled against the inward bent door. And standing over them, backlit by the faint beam in their own hand, was the quiet passenger, not untouched. Their jacket sleeve was dark with blood, and one side of their face carried a fresh burn where something had grazed past too close. But their eyes were clear, alert, very awake. Alive. Relief punched through Lynn, so hard it almost made her knees weak. It lasted half a second before she noticed what was in their other hand. Not a rifle. A small rectangular case. Matte black. Reinforced. Compact enough to carry under one arm. The quiet passenger kicked the warped door the rest of the way shut with a brutal metallic slam, and dropped the manual emergency bar into place. Then they looked at Lynn. "I need everyone away from this corridor," they said. "Now." Lynn stared at the case. "What is that?" The passenger's jaw tightened. "Unit 02, they said. The room went dead silent again. Nora made a broken sound from the floor behind Lynn. The passenger heard it and glanced past her toward the recovery area. "Tamsin's alive," they said. "For the moment." Lynn found her voice first. "You want to lower cargo?" "Yes." "You brought back the thing they were trying to recover?" The passenger's answer was flat. "No." They looked down at the case once, then back up. "I brought back the thing they were trying to wake." And before Lynn could ask another question, the black case clicked from the inside.